Welcome back to the deep dive. If I asked you right now to visualize Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you would instantly see that iconic five-layer pyramid.
Oh, absolutely. It's unavoidable.
It is arguably the most recognizable image in all of modern psychology.
Yeah.
It's in every intro-psych textbook, every management seminar, and probably half the motivational posters you've ever seen.
It's ubiquitous, yeah. But I think it's also dangerously simplified a lot of the time.
Mhm.
The version of the pyramid we get in, say, a management training session, it tends to flatten the really profound and even radical ideas that Abraham Maslow was originally putting forth.
Right.
We lose the emotional, the cultural, and really the spiritual depth of his work when we just reduce it to a simple five-step staircase to success.
Absolutely. And our mission today is precisely that, to go beyond the motivational poster. We're going to dive into the original intent, the actual mechanism of human motivations, specifically why satisfying a need actually acts as a brake, stopping the engine of motivation.
That's such a key point that gets missed.
It is. And we'll look closely at the controversial and really powerful concept of self-actualization. And of course, we also have to face the surprisingly harsh scientific criticisms the theory continues to draw.
In short, we really need to understand how Maslow fundamentally redefined what it means to be human and what truly drives us.
And that redefinition, it really begins with Maslow's place in history. You have Abraham Maslow, born in Brooklyn in 1908, becomes one of the most prominent American psychologists of the 20th century. He's often called the intellectual father of humanistic psychology. And he was writing at a very specific and crucial moment.
Which is when his work became known as the third force in psychology.
Right.
I think for anyone listening, this is probably the most important piece of historical context.
Yeah.
What exactly were those first two forces, and why did Maslow feel they were so completely inadequate to explain humanity?
Right. So the first force was the towering failure of Freudian psychoanalysis. Freud focused so heavily on pathology, on the unconscious, on neuroses, basically on the negative or almost animalistic aspects of our psyche, all the internal conflicts, the things that were wrong with us.
Exactly. And while it was incredibly influential, Maslow felt this view was just cripplingly pessimistic. It was incomplete because it completely ignored the possibility of human greatness. It couldn't explain creativity or altruism or genius.
So if you only study sick people, you develop a theory of sickness.
That's the perfect way to put it. Then the second force was behaviorism, championed by figures like B.F. Skinner. And this was the purely mechanistic approach.
The stimulus response gap.
Yeah, exactly. It largely treated humans like, complex lab rats responding to conditioning and reinforcement schedules. It focused relentlessly on observed behavior, and it effectively dismissed internal feelings, personal growth, ambition. All of that was seen as irrelevant or just unmeasurable.
So if the first force was all about negative pathology and the second was about mechanical reaction, Maslow basically came in and said, wait a minute, where's the soul in all this? Where's the purpose?
Precisely. The third force centered on the positive potential of human beings. Maslow wanted to understand health, not just sickness. He was asking, why do some people achieve this extraordinary fulfillment? Why do some display this universal contentment? Why do people strive for ideals like truth and justice, even when it costs them comfort?
And it's interesting that he didn't even start there, right? He was studying animals at first.
That's what's so fascinating. He started his career studying primate dominance hierarchies. But he shifted pretty quickly because he realized that these existing animalistic and mechanistic theories, they just completely failed to account for our unique human drives, like the deep need for personal growth, for creativity, for self-expression.
It sounds like his whole body of work was, in a way, an act of intellectual rebellion. He was insisting that humans aren't just trying to manage unconscious urges or avoid pain. We're actively seeking meaning. We're seeking transcendence.
We absolutely are. And he captured that core, that driving engine of humanity with one simple but really powerful phrase. Human beings are fundamentally wanting animals.
A wanting animal.
It's a perpetual state. We always have needs, and as soon as one is satisfied and, it drops off our mental list, another one immediately pops up to take its place. The process of motivation is literally endless until death.
And he laid out this entire conceptual framework, which he spent his life refining in his cornerstone work, Motivation and Personality, which came out in 1954. But it wasn't like an instant corporate sensation.
Oh, not at all. Academically, it was groundbreaking. But, the business world tends to lag a bit behind pure research. His ideas only really gained widespread popularity in management circles in the 1960s. And that was after some highly influential thinkers in organizational behavior, like Douglas McGregor, started actively promoting the framework.
McGregor with his Theory X and Theory Y.
Exactly. McGregor adapted Maslow's insights into his famous Theory X and Theory Y management styles, and that's what really showed the business world the profound value of understanding that, employees are motivated by more than just their paychecks. The hierarchy was finally moved from the psychology lab into the office.
Okay, so let's unpack that core structure then. Let's move into the mechanism that governs this perpetual state of wanting, the ladder that dictates our daily priorities.
This is where we introduce the driving engine of the lower part of the hierarchy. And the word for it is prepotency. This is the non-negotiable principle that underlies Maslow's first 4 levels.
Prepotency.
Prepotency. It dictates a ladder structure where the lower needs are always considered more potent or more urgent than the higher ones. You simply cannot effectively focus your psychological energy on a higher need until the lower, more immediately demanding need has been, well, sufficiently met.
It's the ultimate survival priority schedule. I mean, if your house is on fire, you are not sitting there worrying about optimizing your retirement portfolio. The fire is prepotent.
Precisely. And this leads to the absolutely crucial motivation rule that is so often forgotten in the simplified summaries. A satisfied need is, by definition, not a motivator.
Right. Only an unsatisfied need drives your behavior.
Yes. Once a need is met, it just ceases to be the driving force. Your focus automatically shifts up the ladder to the next pressing, unsatisfied demand.
That distinction, that satisfaction actually breeds demotivation at that specific level. That fundamentally changes how we should view rewards in a workplace, for example.
It does.
If an organization pays its staff so well that they never worry about money, which covers their physiological and safety needs, then the organization has to understand that money is no longer a motivator for performance. They have to shift their strategy entirely to focusing on, say, belonging or esteem.
Exactly. You have to look for the deficit to find the driver. So let's walk through those lower layers now, the foundation of the pyramid, which Maslow labeled the lower order needs.
The foundation. Let's start at the bottom.
We begin at the absolute base, layer 1, physiological needs. These are the inescapable biological necessities required for simple maintenance and survival. We're talking hunger, thirst, sleep, breathing, necessary shelter, detoxification.
All the things your body needs to just keep going.
Exactly. And, critically, Maslow also placed sex here. He made the crucial distinction that the reproductive drive itself is a physical, biological function, separate from the emotional need for love and intimacy, which comes much later.
And Maslow was, from what I've read, completely unyielding about the sheer dominance of these needs when they're unmet.
Unyielding is the right word. He emphasized that if a person is starving, their entire cognitive and emotional universe collapses around that single deficit. They literally do not care about higher order concepts, things like freedom, political rights, moral philosophy, art.
Irrelevant.
Totally irrelevant.
No.
Their primary motivation is not to write a novel, it's to find a meal. Their higher needs are essentially put on indefinite hold.
Their whole world just shrinks.
It does. Food, for the starving person, literally becomes their utopia. They idealize it, they dream of it, and nothing else matters. But, and this is the vital transition, once that hunger is satisfied, and only once it is satisfied does it lose its power to direct behavior. That allows the person's psychological energy to move up the hierarchy.
Which, once the body is finally taken care of, leads immediately to layer 2. Security needs, or as it's often called, safety. The organism, having survived today, now seeks to ensure it can survive tomorrow. It wants stability, predictability, freedom from threat.
Right. The shift is from survive today to ensure survival tomorrow. And we see this need expressed in different ways across the lifespan. In young children, for instance, safety manifests most clearly as seeking reassurance from parents, needing consistent structure, preferring routine and rhythm.
A predictable world feels like a safe world to a child.
Exactly. That constancy provides this deep underlying sense of a safe world where they can actually grow.
And what about for adults? How does the safety need show up in modern society where, for most of us, existential threats aren't usually right at our doorstep?
Well, in adults, the safety need drives our long-term behavior. It manifests as seeking a stable job, maybe one with a strong contract or tenure. It's saving money, building a financial buffer, purchasing all kinds of insurance, health, car, home insurance.
They're all hedges against the unpredictability of the future. It's all about creating stability.
That's all it is. And what's fascinating about this layer is Maslow's observation on the role of, civilized government. He noted that in a highly ordered, civilized society, one with functional laws, police forces, fire services, a reliable judicial system, The government actually satisfies the majority of these safety needs for the average citizen.
We're not constantly worried about being mugged or our house burning down with no one to call.
Right. So for most adults in stable societies, these needs are generally inactive as motivators. They stop driving our behavior, not because they've disappeared, but because they are constantly being met by the structures around us.
It's only when those structures fail that the need comes roaring back.
Exactly. It takes a severe external crisis, a war, a major economic crash, a natural disaster, or a sudden period of anarchy to reactivate safety as a primary prepotent driver. And in those moments, you see people regress rapidly back down the hierarchy.
Okay, so once those foundational needs, survival and security, are largely handled, we pivot away from pure biological and physical survival toward interaction and meaning. And that moves us into what he called the middle order needs.
It does. And layer 3 is belongingness and love needs. This is the deep, fundamental social drive. Once we are physically secure, humans just crave connection. We seek affection, friends, family, community belonging, a sense of rootedness.
And Maslow saw the frustration of this need as a huge problem in modern society.
A huge problem. He saw it as the root of so many modern psychological issues: alienation, loneliness, and even clinical depression.
You mentioned earlier how important it was that Maslow was very specific here, especially in distinguishing different kinds of needs that we might lump together.
Yes, this is so crucial. He explicitly and repeatedly differentiated love from sex. He clarified that love, the emotional connection, the intimacy, that sense of belonging, is a higher order need that deals with our psychological place within the group.
Whereas sex is down in layer 1.
Right, as a biological drive, it's a lower physiological need. He argued that mistaking one for the other leads to a profound misunderstanding of human relationships. The need for affection and family is an independent, powerful motivator all on its own.
And once we feel accepted and loved socially, we then need to feel valued. That moves us up to layer 4, esteem needs. This is the need for ego satisfaction and respect.
And this is a really complex and highly effective motivator. Maslow was very careful to divide it into two essential distinct components. And his point was you need both to be satisfied to really move forward.
Okay, let's break those two down. What's the first part?
The first component is self-respect. This is the internal pillar. It's the desire for achievement, for competence, for mastery, confidence, and independence. It's about feeling intrinsically capable and strong, regardless of what anyone else thinks. It's that private feeling of worth.
And the second component, then, must be the public validation of that private worth.
Precisely. The second is recognition. This is the external desire for reputation, for status, for prestige, and respect from others. It's what the external world thinks of your competence. You need your capability to be acknowledged and respected by your peers in your community.
So, to use an example, if I'm a great carpenter, I need to know for myself that I build competent furniture. That's self-respect.
Right.
But I also need my clients and maybe other carpenters to respect my craft. That's recognition.
That's the dynamic. Exactly. And the outcome of successfully satisfying these esteemed needs is powerful. The person feels useful, confident, and necessary. Conversely, Maslow warned that the failure to satisfy them leads directly to pervasive feelings of inferiority, weakness, lack of control, and crippling helplessness, a total lack of morale.
So this brings us to the synthesis of these first 4 layers, what you called the deficit needs or D needs.
The D needs. And I always use the thermostat analogy for this because it so accurately captures the mechanism of homeostasis. These first 4 needs are activated only by a deficit, by a lack of something essential.
Okay, explain how that analogy works in detail and tie it back to that principle of demotivation we talked about.
Okay, so think of the furnace in your house. The need for warmth, which is a safety or physiological need, it isn't active when the temperature is comfortable. It only turns on when you are deficient, when the room drops below the set point on the thermostat.
The lack of heat motivates the furnace to turn on?
Exactly. It supplies heat until the deficit is resolved, the set point is reached, and then the furnace turns off. The ultimate goal is equilibrium. It's homeostasis. It wants to get back to a stable state and then shut down.
So if I'm deficient in belongingness, my drive turns on and motivates me to seek friends. Once I have a strong social circle, that need turns off, and I no longer spend all my time seeking new friends. I automatically shift my focus to the next unsatisfied need, say, esteem.
That's it perfectly. The ultimate goal of a D need is to turn off and maintain balance. There are finite requirements for stability. But this entire mechanical homeostatic process stops dead at the top of the pyramid. And that is where the hierarchy takes its most dramatic, non-mechanical turn.
The transition from deficit to being, we move from needs driven by a lack of something to needs driven by growth.
Yes.
Layer 5, self-actualization. This is the peak, the highest need of the hierarchy, and the one Maslow really dedicated his life to understanding. He believed that even if a person successfully met all four of those D needs, they were safe, fed, loved, and respected, they would still feel restless, discontent, and generally unhappy if they were not doing what they were, as he put it, fitted for.
And that restlessness is the inherent drive toward fulfillment and purpose. It's the need to realize one's unique potential, whatever that may be. It could be being a great parent, brilliant architect, or an innovative farmer.
He had that famous quote about it.
He did. He articulated this fundamental imperative perfectly. A musician must make music. An artist must paint. A poet must write if he is to be ultimately at peace with himself. What a man can be, he must be. It's an internal, almost spiritual drive toward realization, not deficit resolution.
And this internal drive is the hallmark of what he called the being needs, or B needs. So if D needs are all about maintaining balance, what is the core mechanism of a B need?
B needs operate on what you could call a principle of increasing satisfaction. They fundamentally oppose homeostasis. B needs do not go away when you feed them. In fact, they often get stronger when they are fulfilled.
That's a really powerful distinction. How does that actually manifest in real life?
But consider the B need for knowledge, which is a component of self-actualization. The more you learn about, say, physics or history or philosophy, the more complex and fascinating the subject becomes, and the greater your appetite for more knowledge grows.
Right. You don't read one book and say, okay, my knowledge need is now satisfied, I can stop learning forever.
Never. The pursuit of truth or beauty or creativity is self-reinforcing. It's an upward spiral of desire, not a maintenance schedule.
This sounds like a constant state of personal evolution, but you mentioned earlier that reaching this stage is incredibly rare in the general population.
It is. Maslow estimated that only a tiny fraction of the population, maybe less than 2%, ever reached the stage of consistent self-actualization. And this rarity meant that Maslow couldn't just study the average person in a clinic. He had to study exemplars.
Right. He had to work backwards.
He had to. He identified self-actualization retrospectively by studying the lives of exceptional historical and contemporary figures whom he admired. People like Abraham Lincoln, Thomas Jefferson, Eleanor Roosevelt, Albert Einstein, and Mahatma Gandhi. He was trying to determine what unique characteristics they all shared, what traits differentiated them from the 98% who remained primarily motivated by esteem or belonging.
And these characteristics are the true deep dive nuggets. Let's explore those traits he identified.
Absolutely. The first key trait he found is that self-actualizers are profoundly reality-centered. They have this almost uncanny ability to perceive reality efficiently and accurately. They can spot phoniness, dishonesty, and ambiguity very quickly, almost instinctively.
They don't distort the world through wishful thinking or fear or anxiety. They just see what is.
They do. They're grounded. They're honest brokers of reality, which makes them very difficult to manipulate.
Okay, what's the second trait?
The second trait is that they are problem-centered. Their focus is almost always outward, dedicated to a mission, a vocation, or a cause outside of themselves. Maslow observed that Lincoln, for example, wasn't driven by his own ego. He was driven by the problem of preserving the Union and ending slavery. They focused their energy on solving large objective issues rather than spending time constantly worrying about their own minor troubles, which so many of us do.
So they transcend their own ego by dedicating themselves to an external purpose.
That leads directly to the third point. They possess a pronounced need for privacy. They are comfortable being alone. In fact, they often seek solitude as a vital source of energy and creativity.
And this isn't about being cold or antisocial.
No, not at all. It's a reflection of their autonomy. They draw strength and insight from within, which means they are far less reliant on constant external validation from society or their peers.
That need for internal self-sufficiency would naturally make them a bit suspicious of conformity.
It does, which is the fourth trait. They display a profound resistance to enculturalism. They are nonconformists in the most authentic sense of the word. They don't blindly follow social pressures, norms, or expectations simply because that's how things are done.
They're independent thinkers.
Deeply. Maslow noted their relative detachment from their immediate culture allowed them to critique it and ultimately to improve it. They often become revolutionary figures precisely because they stand apart. They follow universal values, not just local customs.
And the final trait, which is perhaps the one that's most universally desirable, it speaks to the richness of their inner experience.
It's the sense of fresh appreciation. This is the ability to look at common, everyday things. a sunrise, a piece of fruit, a moment with a loved one, with the same vivid sense of wonder, awe, and ecstasy, even if they've seen it hundreds of times before.
They don't become jaded. They maintain an almost childlike capacity for joy and gratitude.
Exactly.
So this group, the self-actualized, they seem like they've entirely bypassed the standard rules of motivation we discussed earlier. If they aren't driven by a lack of something, what is their engine?
It is genuinely difficult to explain their behavior using standard D-need motivation theory, precisely because they are not running from anything. They're running toward an ideal. Their motivation comes from the desire to embody and live up to what Maslow called the B values.
The B-value.
Being values. Things like truth, justice, goodness, beauty, unity, and self-sufficiency. They are motivated by the inherent quality of the experience itself, not by what they get out of it.
And that means that when they can't live up to those B values, they suffer. And that's where we get to the concept of metapathologies.
Yes. Maslow argued these are essentially spiritual illnesses that are suffered when these B needs are intensely frustrated. If a self-actualizer who lives for truth and justice has to constantly operate in an environment that's riddled with profound corruption, injustice, or arbitrary cruelty, they suffer intense psychological distress.
And what are the symptoms of this kind of spiritual suffering?
Well, the symptoms are things we see as modern psychological crises. Intense cynicism, chronic despair, a deep alienation, a paralyzing sense of meaninglessness. His idea suggests that the lack of purpose and the violation of our core values are not just philosophical issues. They are fundamentally pathological. They are capable of causing serious psychological harm.
So the need for meaning and purpose is so essential at this B level that its absence is literally sickening. It's not optional.
Absolutely not. And this is often tied to those transient, ultimate moments of fulfillment he observed, what he called the peak experiences.
Right.
Peak experiences are, they're defined as moments of pure bliss, ecstasy, intense awe, and what Maslow termed transcendental knowledge. They are non-striving, non-desiring moments where the self just sort of dissolves into the experience.
What would trigger one?
They might be triggered by intense encounters with art, a profound connection with nature, climbing a mountain, watching a perfect sunset, or through deep meditation.
It's that moment when you feel utterly connected to everything, where time seems to stop, and you feel simultaneously small in the face of the universe, but intensely, vividly alive.
That's a perfect description. During a peak experience, the individual often reports a feeling of being powerful, yet simultaneously helpless, which is the very definition of awe. And importantly, Maslow believed that everyone is inherently capable of these experiences.
Really? Everyone?
He did. But he thought that the majority of people, the non-peakers, as he called them, tend to suppress them, either because they're too intense or because they just don't align with the rigid mechanical structures of their daily lives. But he believed the capacity is there in all of us.
Okay, so we've established this grand conceptual framework for human potential. It raises a fascinating question. If Maslow believed people want to self-actualize, how did he think organizations, businesses, schools, governments, how should they adapt to foster this potential?
That takes us to his practical application framework, which he coined Eupsychian management. He derived the name from the Greek eu for good or healthy, and psyche for mind or soul. So management for the healthy soul.
That sounds incredibly utopian. What was the central goal of Eupsychian management?
The central goal was for organizations to deliberately design systems that help employees satisfy their highest needs, self-actualization and esteem, and to move far beyond the traditional model of just paying salaries to satisfy physiological and safety needs. He fundamentally believed that a healthy organization required healthy, fulfilled people.
So this is a direct shot across the bow of early industrial management styles, like Taylorism, which treated workers as interchangeable, purely economic cogs in a machine.
It was a powerful critique of that very idea. Maslow argued that if a worker is perpetually stuck just managing their lower needs, the organization itself loses their greatest potential, their creativity, their initiative, their ultimate contribution. He saw this as a profound waste of human capital.
So, practically speaking, what would an organization practicing Eupsychian management actually look like? How would it structurally support self-actualization?
Well, for one, it would prioritize things like participatory decision-making. Employees are not just told what to do, they're actually involved in the planning and the strategy. This satisfies the esteemed need for competence and independence.
It gives them a sense of ownership.
It does. And secondly, it would emphasize job enrichment. This means designing jobs that are not monotonous, but are challenging, varied, and allow the worker to use their unique skills and creativity. A sense of ownership over one's work contributes directly to self-actualization. You're giving them autonomy, recognition, and complex problems to solve.
And for public administration, this provides a vital conceptual framework. The idea that the stability and effectiveness of the organization are directly tied to its ability to foster the personal growth of its employees. It insists that managers must view employees as resources to be developed, not just costs to be controlled.
Precisely.
Now, this is all presented as a very rigid five-step staircase, and that's often where the critiques come in. But Maslow himself often corrected this view, didn't he? How did he provide a defense against the rigidity of his own model?
He did. He readily admitted that the visual of the pyramid was often misleading. He acknowledged that the hierarchy is not fixed or rigid for every single person. He provided several important exceptions and acknowledged that value shifts can occur based on individual personality, early life experiences, and importantly, cultural context.
What are the main examples he used to show this flexibility?
He noted, first, that there are value shifts. Some individuals, maybe due to their upbringing or their profession, might consistently prioritize esteem, layer 4, the need for recognition and status, more than love and belongingness, layer 3. They might be willing to sacrifice deep social connection for achievement or fame or professional glory. You see this a lot in highly competitive fields.
That makes sense. What's another exception?
Second, he noted that early life trauma or pathology could entirely alter the hierarchy. For instance, he suggested some psychopathic personalities may have such a damaged capacity for connection that they seem to entirely lose the need for love and belongingness. They might remain purely motivated by selfish physiological or safety gains. The needs are still theoretically there, but the capacity to feel them or act on them is damaged.
And then there's the most powerful exception, the one that completely breaks the prepotency rule in the name of ideals. The martyr.
The martyr is the most dramatic proof of the flexibility of B needs. These are individuals who willfully and consciously sacrifice their lower needs, sometimes even physiological needs like food or sleep, and definitely safety needs, for a higher ideal or a cause. Things like religious faith, political freedom, or justice.
Can you give a specific example that Maslow might have used?
Oh, absolutely. Think of Gandhi again. His commitment to Indian independence and nonviolent resistance often required him to sacrifice his safety. He was imprisoned multiple times. His physiological comfort through hunger strikes, and his security living under constant threat of violence. His B need for justice and truth entirely overrode his lower D needs.
So that demonstrates that for some people, once those higher needs are awakened, they can be strong enough to command the sacrifice of everything below them.
That's right. It's a crucial distinction.
Mm-hmm.
It also reminds us that while we might be consciously striving for these ideals, Maslow believed that most of these needs operate at an unconscious level.
What do you mean by that?
Well, the striving, the sense of lack, the psychological deficit. We often just feel these as a vague sense of dissatisfaction or restlessness. We might not be consciously aware that our anxiety is coming from a lack of community, which is belonging, rather than a lack of money, which is safety. Much of our motivational engine is instinctual and hidden from our immediate conscious recognition, which is why he thought self-reflection was so important.
Okay, we have spent a significant amount of time detailing the brilliance, the nuance, and the application of Maslow's conceptual framework. But to be thorough, to really provide the deep dive perspective, we have to turn to the significant critiques the theory has faced over the decades. What are the severe limitations noted by scientific and organizational critics?
The critiques are substantial, and they often focus on the scientific rigor of the work. The primary target is Maslow's methodology. He suffered from severe methodology flaws in his initial research into self-actualizers.
Okay, so how is the methodology flawed?
Well, remember, he studied a small, select, and entirely biased group of historical figures and contemporaries whom he personally admired. Critics argue this was not scientifically rigorous at all because Maslow essentially created a list of traits he admired, then selected historical figures like Lincoln and Einstein who fit those traits, and then presented those traits as objective findings of self-actualization.
So he was basically creating the definition from the examples, rather than proving the examples fit some objective, pre-existing definition.
It was essentially observational, subjective philosophy that was sort of disguised as rigorous psychology. He wasn't studying the average human condition. He was creating a philosophical ideal based on exceptionalism and his own interpretation of greatness. This selection bias makes the entire top layer of the pyramid incredibly difficult to generalize or test.
And that leads straight into the second major issue, which is the validity challenges. Subsequent quantitative research has really struggled to confirm the theory's neat five-step structure.
Absolutely. The idea of 5 distinct sequential categories just does not hold up empirically. Critics like Wabha and Birdwell, who were two prominent researchers, they conducted these extensive literature reviews of organizational motivation, and they found very serious issues. They found no consistent empirical evidence that human needs actually exist in exactly 5 distinct hierarchical categories, or that they strictly adhere to that prepotency rule in all cultural contexts.
So what were their counterfindings? If it's not 5 neat layers, what did they find instead?
They often found that the needs tended to cluster into far fewer groups, sometimes just 2 or 3 broad categories, like existence needs, which would combine physiological and safety, and growth needs, which would combine esteem and actualization. The need separation between, say, safety and belongingness, it often just dissolved under empirical testing.
So the famous clean 5-step pyramid might be a highly useful conceptual model, but structurally it lacks robust empirical support when you actually try to measure it.
That's the consensus among many motivation researchers. And furthermore, there's the unavoidable problem of vagueness. Concepts like peak experiences or fresh appreciation or even self-actualization itself. They're heavily philosophical and incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to measure or define precisely using scientific empirical methods.
You can't quantify transcendental knowledge with a standardized test.
You can't. And that subjectivity makes the entire theory really hard to test or apply uniformly across different demographics or cultures.
And if it's hard to measure, it's hard to use practically in the business world, even with the best intentions, because you can't really track an employee's progression up a pyramid.
Exactly. And that leads to the core managerial critique. Critics often call the theory interesting but not consistently valid for practical day-to-day management use because it doesn't offer a rigid, universally applicable guide. And it also has a distinct and very important cultural bias.
Okay, how does the hierarchy reflect a specifically Western bias?
The theory is profoundly individualistic. The ultimate goal is self-actualization, the realization of the unique personal potential. This tends to ignore or dismiss cultural environments where the pursuit of the collective good is prioritized.
It doesn't account well for collectivist cultures.
Not at all. In many cultures, group needs, societal harmony, and adherence to tradition may perpetually override the pursuit of individual fulfillment. In those societies, seeking individual transcendence at the expense of the group would not be seen as a sign of health, but as a sign of selfishness.
Okay, so we have a theory that is profoundly influential globally, yet it's criticized as being scientifically flawed, vague, and culturally limited. So why? Why does it still persist in being taught and used everywhere?
Maslow's legacy endures, I think, precisely because of the distinction he himself made between a scientific model and a conceptual framework. He never intended for the hierarchy to be a rigid, fixed physical blueprint for every single person on Earth. He readily acknowledged the exceptions. What he provided was a powerful conceptual framework, a new lens through which to understand the complexity of human motivation beyond simple rewards and punishments.
And the brilliance of that framework was its shift in focus.
Absolutely. Maslow's legacy is secure because he was a true pioneer who successfully shifted the focus of psychology toward positive human potential. He insisted that psychology should not just focus on mental illness, but on mental health, on excellence, and on achievement. He gave us the vocabulary to even discuss human flourishing.
And on a practical level, it remains a gold standard in management thinking, even if those 5 layers aren't perfectly proven.
It provides immense managerial utility. It forces managers to understand that employees are whole people who require more than just a paycheck. It emphasizes that recognition, growth opportunities, creative input, the chance to use one's unique skills, all those higher needs, are essential for long-term engagement, motivation, and organizational health. It's a powerful reminder that if you want a top-tier workforce, you have to appeal to their top-tier needs.
So to bring this all together, we've covered the revolutionary nature of Maslow's humanistic approach, the third force, which moved beyond just sickness and mechanism. We've sharply differentiated the 4 deficit needs, D needs, which strive for equilibrium and turn off when they're satisfied.
From the ultimate being needs, B needs, which seek growth and actually get stronger when they're fulfilled.
And we highlighted the progressive application of this thinking in UPSC management, focusing on fostering purpose in the workplace, while also rigorously acknowledging the legitimate critiques regarding scientific methodology, cultural bias, and the difficulty of measuring those sublime B values. But the truly challenging part of this deep dive, I think, The part that connects Maslow's theory right back to your daily life is that concept of metapathologies. Maslow observed that when people who operate at the B-need level, people who live for truth, justice, goodness, and beauty, when they cannot fulfill those higher values in their environment, they suffer these spiritual illnesses: cynicism, despair, and profound alienation.
It's the ultimate consequence of an organization or even a society that is functional enough to satisfy the bottom four needs, keeping everyone safe, fed, and busy, but fails entirely to nourish the soul.
And if Maslow believed everyone is fundamentally capable of peak experiences and, by extension, driven by these B needs, what does that mean for how we structure our lives, our communities, and our work? So the final provocative thought for you to consider is this. Given that these spiritual illnesses are the result of frustrated B needs and not simply material lack, what intentional, proactive changes could you make to your personal environment or advocate for in your organization to ensure those fundamental B values, truth, justice, and beauty, are being consciously prioritized and nourished? What happens to society if we become fixated only on satisfying the bottom four needs, ensuring perpetual comfort and safety, but we systematically starve ourselves of the fundamental elements required for true human flourishing and purpose?
Because if the relentless pursuit of meaning, truth, and creation is not just a pleasant hobby, but a fundamental human necessity, Maslow warns us that we ignore it at our collective peril. The cost of a comfortable life without purpose is not neutrality. It is despair.
Think about that profound connection between meaning and mental health. We'll see you on the next deep dive.